Good evening and welcome to another evening art stream with myself, Ferro, and we're joined here tonight by continued co-host, artist supreme, Alexander Adams. Good evening, sir.
Thank you very much. Genuine AA, except no decaffeinated, dehydrated substitutes.
What coffee are you drinking? Yeah, what coffee are you drinking right now? Yeah, and we're also joined with Panama Hat.
Welcome, hello, sir. Hello. I'm here to third man on this stream today, and I'm drinking just a cup of Earl Grey to eat today. Nothing very fancy.
Yes, I'm actually out of Earl Grey, and all they had left was Lady Grey, which is the embarrassing low quality alternative.
Yes.
But what can you do? Okay. So last time we can start.
Before we start, a couple of housekeeping things, because I noticed a couple of comments. Oh, I made a mistake in the last stream, so I want to correct that. I mentioned Georges Rodenbach's novel as In Bruges. Of course, In Bruges is the film, which is not at all the novel of 1890, whatever it was, which is Bruges la Mort, Dead Bruges. So that's the name of the novel. Also, someone asked if I was going to watch the Adam Curtis documentary. I did. I watched the first 5 episodes. First 4 were very interesting, stimulating, provocative, and then I watched the 5th one, and he went completely off the rails. So I think I'm checked out of that now. But I would recommend the first 4 episodes.
I'm up to number 3, and again, there's some really interesting analysis and takes that are very, kind of match up to what more distant right wing viewers may have. So I think it's definitely right. Although you can tell there's some deep democracy blue pilling going on all the way through that documentary. Yes. So you have to. I sent it across to Semiagog, and he literally switched it off within the first 15 minutes because he hadn't been briefed that Curtis is basically a leftist. But
well, we knew that already. I mean,
yeah exactly. Anyway, so last time we looked at this really interesting, underrated, very loosely connected group of artists known as the Symbolists, starting roughly from the 1850s, going on all the way up to the 1920s. So it's this this kind of slow move. It's a glacial movement. It's international, but there are definitely certain hubs and certain positions that different schools come out of. And last time we were looking through some Belgians, a few Frenchies, and a couple of English that I was bringing to the table. And again, I think we're going to do something similar tonight, where we're going to look in and focus in on a couple of different artists, look at their works, but also, thankfully, we've got Panama here, our literary expert and general wordsmith. And
thank you very much.
He'll be taking us through the more literary side, because, of course, the Symbolist movement is most famous for Baudelaire's works and the kind of group around him. So again, yes. we did mention this last time, but they're kind of parallel, aren't they?
Well, I mean, they are, and more so than a lot of other literary and artistic movements, because, of course, particularly in literature, the Symbolists were trying to evoke kind of irrational, kind of like inner emotions via, as it says in the name, symbols, and sort of short elliptical bits of words that could bring out those emotions. And that is, it's quite an ambitious thing to do, of course, because that is largely a artistic realm. It was, prior to that, it was not really something that literature had tried to broach, because, it on the face of it, it does seem kind of absurd. It's like, well, the poet can't paint a landscape with words, and even if he can, the painter can do it 1,000 times, better than he can. So, and then, of course, on the obverse of symbolism, you have kind of the Ezra Pound-driven imagists who were trying to kind of rebel slightly against symbolism while carrying over its message by kind of pinning down concrete images, as opposed to the symbolists' more kind of abstract, flowing visuals, basically.
Yeah, interesting. And again, I think it's one of those movements that lasted for a decent amount of time, because Baudelaire's, when's he operating roughly? Like the 50s, isn't it? Is it all?
Baudelaire.
Yeah.
Sorry. Who? That would be, yes. He through basically the middle part of the 1800s.
Yeah, but then all the way through to Pound, and then he's like 19.
Pound is like writing from like sort of 1905, 1908, pre-World War One, all the way up to the 70s, 60s or 70s. He's somebody who had this like bizarrely long artistic career, spanning all these various eras and themes. So yes, it basically carries you from like early Victorian times all the way up to basically the modern day and sort of the beat poets. This topic. So yeah, it's a good thing to try and talk about.
Okay, great. So maybe let's just dive into it and bring up the kind of first figure for today, and we're going to talk about Pierre Puvis de Chavannes, or I've heard it pronounced in a variety of different ways.
I would say Puvis de Chavannes. Chavannes, sorry.
Yeah, Chavannes. And we talked about Moreau last time as this kind of slightly outside of the academy French maverick artist, who in his own lifetime was recognized by a select group of members, had his own museum, but wove kind of symbolic works, like symbolism, into his work. But Puvis, he was, by the end of his career, one of the most famous and internationally recognized artists in France, and also across the world. And so he's a super important figure. And what I think is interesting about him is that he is almost like this colossal figure that spans both traditionalism and also modernity. He was picked up by the Academy of the time and but by modernists at the same time, or the kind of the Impressionists, with like we'll see later kind of references coming through from Seurat and passing on to Seurat and Gauguin. Alex, do you have anything to add to kind of the intro about Puvis?
Yeah, I think you've covered it very well. Yeah, he got lots of official commissions, so he's sort of invited to paint various murals. I think I saw one in Marseille. There's one in the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Marseille. So he was I mean, obviously he wasn't really an academic artist, but he leans very heavily on tradition. He works quite well with symbolism, so he's an ideal artist for civic commissions. But then, as you say, he was also picked up by the modernists, and he was greatly influential on Picasso, especially during Picasso's rose and blue periods.
Interesting. I didn't know much about the Picasso influence. Yeah, so I should refine what I say about academic, but by that I mean he actually his background is pretty bourgeois. His parents are like I think they're engineers, and his father was an engineer. He basically flunked out of the exams, went to Italy, and then decided to become an artist at 24. And at that point, rather than going to the École des Beaux-Arts, which we talked about, that Moreau ended up in, he basically sort of self-started by himself, but also tried to get in with a few existing artists of the time. So he's not academic in the sense he wasn't part of the kind of academic heritage. But, I think he did kind of get his paintings in various salons and stuff like that. He was kind of quite like mainstream by the end of his life. So again, he's interesting because he's another, just like Moreau was another self-supported man, sort of independent from commissions. He could literally he didn't really have to bend his creative genius to the plebeish minds of the French bourgeois at the time.
Thank God.
But it's interesting how the kind of comparisons between the two. But I guess the only other thing to say is, again, he does have this kind of classical background as well that you mentioned, Alex. It's super important, both in terms of his education, where he was kind of like brought up on Latin and Greek texts. Apparently, he could recite Virgil, the Virgil's Aeneid, like the whole way through in Latin, which is pretty based.
That's quite something.
Yeah, but also he sort of apprenticeshiped with a couple of these French classical artists, and again we talked about last time. We're coming out of French Romanticism with David, etc., and I think Couture was his longest.
Thomas Couture ran a very famous studio where he trained a whole slew of really influential artists who ranged from the Impressionists through to the academic artists through to the Symbolists. So Couture is a very important teacher.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe let's just dive straight into some of these pictures. And what I wanted to do is to give a bit of a flavour as to kind of his career as it goes on. So can you guys see that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wonderful. Unfortunately, I can't. Oh yeah, I can zoom out here. There we go. So this is one of his early works. So he was born in 1824, and this is 1856. So he's 32 at the time. So again, he sort of gets into art a little bit later. He's not one of these kind of like freakish child geniuses that are kind of doing perfect, busts of their parents at the age of 10 or something like that. But you can see by this relatively late stage that he's come straight out of the kind of French romantic classical school, and this is a picture of Salome. So obviously the story of Salome talking about the beheading of John the Baptist, and you can see she's looking down at I don't know if you can see the figure across here is John in the corner. And she's got the kind of famous plate that you see in the kind of Renaissance paintings, calling for his head. So there's not much, a huge amount to talk about here. But again, things like the Black Servant is again very much in the kind of French style, I think. But
I think that's very common in Orientalist paintings. So I think Orientalism would make a very good subject for a future stream.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great shout. But I would describe this as like a pretty mainstream French work, nothing out of the ordinary. But what's interesting is after a second trip to Italy, he gets in his head that he wants to go for these kind of larger monumental works. And we mentioned, sorry, Alex, you mentioned some of these larger public works that he's famous for. Well, he made an active effort to kind of move into this space, and one of the first pieces of work here is called Travail. Now, I did see John D in the chat. He's probably very, very excited by all these young men working very hard, but
he's just interested in the art. I don't know what you mean.
Exactly. But this is actually a large mural that was originally on for the like a museum in I'm trying to read my notes now, Omil maybe. But basically there was two of these large murals, one for work, one for rest, and you can see here the kind of depictions of various men at work, and even actually women at work. So you've got three clustered scenes: the kind of woodsman at the front, the blacksmiths, taking the hot iron out, and then they're all kind of working the iron, and you've got the kind of ploughman tilling. Now, what's interesting about this is that we're going to start to see quite a change in style. So again, if you look at the colours of the kind of early classical style work, everything's a lot more kind of muted. And the first thing that you'll kind of notice about Puvis is that you kind of enter his kind of very soft, blue-tinged world. Again, I don't know if you're going to be talking much about Arcadia, Panama as a concept, but this idea of this kind of other place is super important.
Yes. Well, I mean, again, as far as I know, for the literary symbolists, and I presume, based on what you're saying, this is also true for the artistic ones, is that they were quite disgusted at the commercialism and industrialism that was springing up all around them in that 100-year period. And so, yes, as you mentioned, Farah, there is this concept of kind of Arcadia, this kind of perfect rural world in which man is in harmony, this kind of working harmony with nature, and it is kind of couched in a reaction against the modern world, which this painting very clearly puts forward. I mean, you've got the kind of heroic kind of I'm not sure if it would be technically correct, but I would call it sort of Titanism in these people here. You know, these like strong, hard men working away. And then, of course, you've got the woman there, you know, has she just given birth to the child?
Yeah, I think she's just breastfeeding, so you can see that she's kind of covered in a fleece. But again, it's that version of like idealized woman as this kind of provider and feeder. And I just sort of love the old crone as well. There's something about kind of you're literally handing the next generation to the mother. There's something interesting there. So basically this kind of these two kind of there's like the two murals kind of start to kind of create this style, and again it's interesting discussions about style as well, because I hadn't realized that when we talk about style, that the idea of style itself was kind of pioneered by Baudelaire. From what I understand, he's obsessed with like people creating a certain style, and from what I understand, Puvis took that and then tried to run with it. But what's interesting is he kind of like fuses some of the kind of traditional classical works and classical ideas with these kind of new allegorical ideas. So he's keeping things like the symbolical order of things, like depending where things are placed on the picture, they have different meanings and height. Class is important, and again, the ideas of perfection and heroism as well. I love that. The word of Titan, Titanic work is does a good example. Now, if you've ever been to the National Gallery, I don't know if they've changed the position of this painting, but if you walk through the doors and look behind you, above the entranceway is this painting, which is obviously the beheading of John the Baptist. Again, what's interesting is that Puvis has quite a few of these biblical paintings. Actually, I don't know if anyone knows his kind of religious affiliation at all.
You're going to tell us something about Rose Croix?
No, I have no idea. I was more asking.
Oh, no. Well, I think he wasn't he involved with Rose Croix, which is basically the Catholic symbolist movement. I'm just skimming. No, I can't see any mention of it, but I know that Delville, who we'll talk about later, was definitely involved with that.
Yeah, because again, like when you think of like French in this period, it's pretty, or certainly like the Impressionists, it's very atheistic, but he definitely has like quite a strong Catholic vein running through, which is quite interesting. But again, this is another one of these kind of like very soft, very flat images as well. So again, when talking about Puvis, you got to understand that he's trying to kind of mess around with perspective and not just display things photo accurately, but more like creating both 2D and 3D at the same time. So you can see something like this step here creates that 3D element, but actually there's a lot of flatness across the left.
We can't see the bottom of the picture.
Hold on a second.
So yeah, you're right. So the what you do is you get the look of a fresco. So something that's typical about a fresco is that it's quite pale. So if you, for example, look at the frescoes of Masaccio and Giotto, and to a lesser extent to a lesser extent Michelangelo and so forth, you'll find that they're actually quite pale, quite flat. The colours aren't particularly strong. The picture plane is quite shallow. You get sort of a dry, chalky quality, which is because what you're doing is you're applying tempera paint onto wet plaster, and it soaks into the plaster. You're not actually applying paint that's lying over the plaster. It's actually soaking into the plaster while the plaster's still wet. Now, this painting, I imagine, was done in oil paint, but he's making it look like a fresco.
Yeah. Exactly, and like he's got a very unique technique to do that. Again, I've never painted in oil, so I can't talk much about it. But from what I've read, it was all about like removing shading as part of your work, basically, and also lots of muting of colors. Again, everything seems very flat. And again, I think what's interesting about Puvis is that he's been pretty much forgotten about, certainly outside of France. And I think one of the reasons potentially why is that a lot of his paintings look the same. They have that samey quality because everything is so muted. But again, we've literally got the moment that John's head's going to be chopped off. And again, I think what's clever about Puvis is that he creates these original moments from well-known stories. So again, if you think about John the Baptist, what do you think about? I'm thinking is it like Caravaggio's Caravaggio did his head on the plate, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also another one of him being executed as well.
As well, okay.
The one that was painted in Malta.
Okay, yes. But from my understanding, again, Alex, you can prove me, tell me if I'm wrong. But this is a relatively unique kind of layout and scene.
Yeah, it's very unusual to have it so sort of flat and frieze-like.
Yeah, and again, frieze-like is quite a good way to explain what his paintings look like a little bit. But yes, you've got the execution here, John. You can tell because he's always dressed in his animal hide clothes, and also the kind of elongated cross that he's looking to. You've got Herod giving the old thumbs up to the execution there. Salome with her plates looking on, dressed in her kind of floral robe, and then quietly at the background, an unknown figure weeping for John. So again, it's what I think. Again, if you look at Salome's face, for example, there is that kind of look of reflection and melancholy. Again, melancholy is quite a good word for his work. There's a lot of reflection. There's no kind of extreme joy in anything. Salome often is shown kind of as being just super happy or ecstatic, but here she's almost regretting her actions, or
you're right. I mean, certainly from a facial perspective, it's not expressive at all. They're quite impassive, and that reflects obviously his attraction to sort of the early Renaissance, when the figures are less expressive.
Yeah, exactly, and again, like the trips to Italy were a really big part of his kind of growth and learning as well. So I think just he does rely on the Renaissance quite a lot. Interestingly, so that painting was done in like the late 60s. Interestingly, something I always forget about is the 1870 Franco-Prussian War. But what I always forget about is how devastating the impact it had on the art scene in France. So obviously Paris itself was besieged, but apparently there was a huge art slump in 1878, and that had a big impact. And actually, Puvis was part of the National Guard. He signed up, which is quite cool as well.
That's right. There was a brigade, I think, of artists who specifically served together, and I think that included Degas, and there was a couple of the Impressionists who actually died in the fighting.
That's interesting. That's an interesting topic. But I think that definitely had an impact on his work. Okay, so this next piece is called the Jeunes Filles au Bord de la Mer. So it's the young women by the sea, and again, you've kind of got that fresco-like feeling immediately in terms of the kind of colours, the lightness, the kind of fadedness to it.
It's very flat as well.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's nothing to really draw you in from a perspective. Again, with Chavannes, he kind of lays out his. They call it the three band pattern: the sky, the sea, and the land. And you see that in virtually all of his works. He loves the sea, and again, I think it's the sea as like a symbolic entity is quite interesting. Biblically, when you talk about the deep, for example, there's this kind of evil connotation to the deep. If you think about the shoreline or the shore, there's kind of like the shore of memory, and there's the kind of repetition. So there's lots of meaning inside there. But what's interesting about this painting is that we don't know much about it. We're presented with just these, three young women. They're all kind of looking in different directions. They're not interacting with one another. Are they three separate people? Are they one person in, you're seeing little different vignettes of time. Do they, again, the symbology of three women also can be tied into things like the fates. And again, if you see the kind of eyes of this young woman down here, he's painted it in such a way where you can't even see the eye hole, the eyes properly. So it could be like, so the fates only had one eye between them, so they'd often be depicted as being these blind women. So there's kind of that kind of classical hint at that, but it's quite a mysterious painting basically, and no one really knows about what it really means. But
I mean, what's interesting to me from kind of just somebody who browses through art like this is that, of course, in so many paintings of this fashion with sort of nude or half nude women, you get the kind of innocent, sort of happy, fertile sort of plushness to them. And although these women aren't sort of haggard looking or kind of physically ill looking, they have that kind of, there's like a sort of tiredness to them. Obviously there's the woman on the left there, literally sort of collapsed on the ground in a fit of sadness, and the woman on the right sort of, wistfully leaning against the ground and staring out at the ocean. And as you pointed out, none of them are looking at each other or showing any kind of bond really. They appear to sort of have a connection, but there's no relationship between them. And I think if I was gonna looking at this, I'm getting the vibe of a painting which I think is by Jean-Léon Gérôme, called "Truth Emerging from the Well," where again it's that kind of quite sort of shocking depiction of a woman who, although not physically distressed, is kind of in a state of I suppose panic and is sort of like wet and sopping. This painting here. It's just sort of it as I said, it lacks that sort of quiet, gentle femininity that you see so often in other artworks featuring women like this.
Yeah, and I guess that's one of the kind of features of symbolism as well, is kind of the woman, but not as an idealized form. It's always these kind of like melancholy, sad, wistful. It's these beautiful but deadly, screaming witch. That's
what I love about this, is that she's literally screaming at the viewer as she's pulling herself out of a well, covered in water. It's so, I suppose the cliche term would be, it's sort of so raw, but it's just it's really interesting to me, that style, and that you get here with her obviously in panic and screaming at the viewer, and then in the other one them just sort of lounging in sort of tension and unhappiness, it seems, on this bit of coastline.
Yeah, it's a good comparison again, just for the art style. So Jerome is like, he is like your proper academic artist. I think he got like an award from like one of the Prussian like the Prussian king and stuff like that. He was again very, very famous. But again, you can see the realism, the high chroma, vivid colors compared to, and again see like quite accurate realism on the faces compared to these. They kind of almost remind me of like Grecian masks or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's interesting. But yeah, we have no idea what it means. So put
Also,
your own meaning into it. So
this may be a good time to bring up a small quote from Mallarmé when he was writing a letter to a friend, and he said that the essence of symbolism is to depict not the thing but the effect it produces. And I think I do get that sense from this, is that it's sort of the effect of the sort of wistfulness and the tiredness at the sort of close of the day of these women is more striking than the women themselves, which I don't know. Perhaps I'm applying that wrongly, but
no,
that's
you're 100% right. And from an artistic perspective, I think this is why a lot of people do view Puvis as like the father to Impressionism, or like certainly a father. Because that idea of the subject doesn't really matter. It's more about the colours and the design and the feeling that you're getting from it. That runs very deep in Impressionism. But like this is why I'm saying that Puvis is a bit funny, because he does span both that ideology, and also he is drawing from Hellenistic traditions and symbols at the same time. So you can never be quite sure which camp he really is in. Okay, let's just go to just got two more from Puvis, and we can move on. The next one it's another biblical one. I'm afraid I've definitely focused more on his works, but this is L'Enfant Prodigue. So this is the prodigal son. And what I quite liked about this painting was that it sort of sits outside of his blue tone scheme. So again, if you see Jean's and also Travail, that blue is the dominant color in it. But what's interesting about L'Enfant is that, again, the kind of green and reds are the real anchor colors to it. And also there's a brilliant quote that apparently he said when writing that, before painting this, and he said, "I've had enough of women carrying lyres. I want to paint pigs." Which, I mean, Alex, have you ever had that feeling?
No, I almost said something quite rude there about models. No, no. I mean, sometimes you do get that sort of attraction. You want to paint something different. You do want to, get out of your comfort zone, and he's got quite a few pigs in there. So I think that must have satisfied his desire. I mean, there must be about a dozen there.
You're right. Actually, he's really gone for like every single angle on the pig as well. That's great.
That's very sort of D-esque, isn't it? I don't want to paint women anymore. I'm just going to paint pigs instead of women.
Do we have a date on that?
Yes, I do. This is 1890s. There wasn't a specific. Okay. Yeah. Specific dates. So we can see here the prodigal son. We can tell it's him because you can see this beautiful deep red brocaded gold. His robe has been shredded, and you can see he's only left in his undergarments, which aren't even covering himself up. Here the pigs are eating better food than him. So this is obviously from the parable where the prodigal son goes off, gets his father's inheritance, goes out partying, and ends up literally feeding pigs for a living. And this is the moment of realization that he's at the lowest point in his life. And there's a really interesting significance in his hands. I don't know if people can recognize it, but they're placed on the chest. And again, symbolically and iconographically, that's the figure that you have for baptism. So it's almost this point of realization of this. Look, I need to go back to my father. He'll forgive me. Is kind of playing into Christian ideas of repentance or rebirth or again baptism. So he's kind of realized that he's had that kind of revelation moment, and we've caught him just as he's about to go through that. So it's a really poignant moment. Again, if you see this kind of angular, scrawny face, again, he's not an attractive youth by any means. Again, not an idealized classical form, but there is still, a strong classical element to his pose. Again, look at the kind of...
Looks like Virginia Woolf.
He does actually
look like Virginia Woolf. Yeah, that famous picture of her. I wonder if there was any connection between the two, as in because the resemblance is so striking. Now you pointed out.
Well, if this is 1819, I mean, this is too early. So
no, but I mean, as in, do you think maybe the pose she strikes in that famous picture may have had something to do with this?
Maybe,
I don't, perhaps.
Just on the little classical elements, I just love this little contrapposto foot, which again is very unnatural, but again he's snuck a little bit of additional classicism in there. But yeah, so again, this is kind of but the 90s. So just on his career in general, he does get recognised relatively early on, and again the fact that he can paint and not have to worry about money means that he's able to do lots of commissions, and again his sort of niche as the mural painter definitely helps him. But his he produces a serious body of work. And then I just wanted to finish off with one of his later murals here. This is L'Hiver or Winter, 1892, and this is all about that kind of work and hardship of winter. So again, a lot of his murals are allegorical. Again, it's like travail and work, it's rest, it's thinking about the muses, and this is the mural of winter, and I liked it because it's almost like the sun is setting on his career, and he's producing this last work. And I guess the first thing that's very striking is the kind of use of verticalism, the use of lines to create spaces. You can see these trio pulling down a tree, and again, it's kind of got that Renaissance-y feeling of 3D and 2D again. You've got the kind of 3D from these guys across here, but the kind of flatness of this scene on the left-hand side. You've got these two guys carrying a large bundle of sticks.
A hunting party, perhaps, in the background on the horses.
Yeah, exactly. They've just there's Panama on the horse. he's just shot that deer,
bringing in the hunt.
Yeah, exactly.
In another world, Pharaoh. In another world.
Exactly. Here's me. Here's me and my child. I'm warming her feet on the fire.
Yeah.
But again, there is this element of mystery to his paintings. Again, we don't know what's going on with this group. So on the face value, it's pretty simple. It's just a couple of people. He's maybe thinking almost like Bruegelian, Gothic painting almost. But then he's added in these kind of few little mysterious characters and conversations that are going on that make you question and wonder. Maybe there's something a little bit more going on here.
But there is, I think. And sorry to kind of interrupt, but I think that. Because you mentioned earlier the whole concept of kind of Arcadia, and of course most academics will quickly tell you that that Arcadia is a sort of this idealized reactionary thing that never really existed. But I mean, to me, the concept of the Arcadia was something very real, because you look at this scene, this could be like, medieval Novgorod. It could be the French countryside. It could be somewhere in England in the north. Like this basically was life in winter for the average person for nigh on thousands of years, and there's nothing that suggests to me that this was not a scene you could have had in real life, with this community of people, working with there's something. I mean, as I said earlier, the essence of the Symbolists was in kind of eschewing the kind of any sense of commercialism or industrialism or even sort of urbanism. And what I love about this is that there's no sort of like hint of a town, really, apart from that sort of storage hut in the background. There's no hint of sort of a town or anywhere these people actually live, but there's just that one ruined stone structure that could have been an old chapel or something. Just that sense that this is an eternal scene. That this is it's been this way for so long, and it will continue to go on like this. It's almost post-civilizational with that ruin. Actually, that's a good almost
point.
Yeah. And there's this like none of these people all look strong. They look healthy. There's a young child there. There's the sense of continuity, fertility. Look at the men pulling down the tree. They're all sort of like strong and fit and healthy, you know.
And you can see John Smith of 1381 or whatever he is, but making his horseshoe.
Yeah, there you are. You know, it's really like I know that there's the whole meme around sort of this is what they took from us, but you know, in a sense, this is what they took from us. You know, this sort of, I sound like such a hippie, I suppose, but the connection with nature and the natural world, and just the harmony of the way that they're harvesting these trees and sustaining themselves for the winter is just so wonderful to look at.
So just on that kind of connection to nature and harmony, you know, all of the three scenes are connected to wood as well. So again, it's the wood gathering, it's the wood felling, wood gathering, and wood burning. You know, so again, there is that interesting kind of naturalism and almost anti industrialization message as part of it as well. So that's a good point. Okay. Enough time on Puvis, but basically just to kind of finish off, you know, insanely popular figure at the time. Just in terms of kind of influences, Seurat had a kind of a piece that was inspired by this, where he had three of his models who all didn't look at each other. Gauguin had one of his, is it Tahitians? Kind of turn away.
The Tahitian scenes. Yeah, you think of the poses, which is the three. It's the same model 3 times sitting in the studio. Well, but in different poses in the studio. That's the Seurat painting. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the 3 graces. Yeah.
Yeah, although apparently Gauguin was like didn't think much of Puvis, or at least said that. But there we go. That's an interesting symbolist. But Panama, do you want to take us through some more about Baudelaire and the literary scene of the time?
Yes. So, I mean, the whole thing around literature in this period, as I said before, was that they were trying to. They were not sort of revolutionary in terms of what they wanted to do with literature. They just wanted to express via poetry and via literature certain things. They essentially wanted to bring back a sense of feeling that they were losing in the world around them, a sense of sort of basic humanity, you know, to do with the emotions you feel that were being stripped away by a world only concerned with money. And of course, in France, this was felt most highly because it's arguably the sort of prior to Russia becoming red, it's the revolutionary epicenter of everything, you know. And I mean, to be honest, there isn't a huge amount I can just say generally on this, but that's essentially it. And as I said, that quote from Mallarmé about trying to not depict the thing, but the effect of the thing. So, for example, there's a translation of a poem by him called "The Swan" that I will just read. It's difficult to read it poetically, of course, because it's in English and the original is in French, so I don't get the sense of meter to it. But it's very short. It goes like this: "The virgin, lively and beautiful today, will it tear us up with a drunken wing beat? This hard, forgotten lake that lurks beneath the frost." The transparent glacier of flights not taken with a blow from a drunken wing. A swan of long ago remembers that it is he, magnificent but without hope, who breaks free. And it's that sort of the beginning of almost the experiential poem, as opposed to the sort of narrative and the sort of longer. I'm not sure what the sort of general term for it would be. Sort of, it isn't really trying to tell you something with the contents of it. It isn't really trying to tell you, obviously, about a swan or a glacier. It's trying to hit you with that sense of overwhelming whiteness and innocence and kind of crystalness, I suppose I would say, as just as opposed to trying to, as I said, tell you something with its components. That's basically the essence of what they were trying to do in literature, which is, you know, that it's a lot more easy to sum up than it is with art, of course. That's basically that would be my sort of piece on that, for just what you asked for.
It's interesting. So again, like talking about something like the swan, brings. I didn't even think about the whiteness of the swan. I immediately thought symbolically of like it is a symbol of power and regalness, but also there's kind of classical connotations with its use. So there are ways of kind of using words in a powerful way to be able to do that.
There's also a famous painting by, I can't remember, by a Dutch painter, and the swan is supposed to be a symbol of Holland. So this idea of there's this great giant swan in the process of opening its wings and flying towards the viewer, and it's quite sort of impressive and dynamic, and that's supposed to be a symbol of Holland in the same way that the monarch of the Glen is supposed to be a symbol of Scotland. So you have all sorts of symbolism in the sort of in heraldry.
Interesting. Yeah. So now one thing I wanted to talk about with Baudelaire is for anyone tuning in to the other AAs, that's what we call him, the other AA. His cigar.
AA.
Well, sorry. Yeah.
Ersatz, fake AA.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Persian.
Yes. His cigar stream, obviously covering on the last topic. Oh, sorry. The one before last was Yoki's Imperium, and Yoki had quite a mean-spirited paragraph about Baudelaire. I don't know if I'll be able to get it up, but I think in summary, the general gist was that he believes that this, his poetry was the beginning of the end, so to speak, because of his almost fetishization of the ugly and the horrific. The saying that the sick is beautiful and the anemic is wonderful and stuff like that. I don't know if you had any.
But Baudelaire said that he talked about the essence of beauty, and he said that the true modern beauty would have something of the grotesque in it, that it wouldn't be purely beautiful, that it'd be strange as well.
I completely, that's correct. And I mean, Yoki's take on Baudelaire only really makes sense if you take a deterministic view of art, which I don't, because that's completely absurd, essentially. He's basically saying that, obviously there is a through line from Baudelaire to the kind of nadir of free university verse of the 60s and the 70s and afterwards. But, it's not like because Baudelaire did what he did, art, the art and literature began to collapse. If anything, he was very much a revitalizing force, in his poetry and just in his personality, the things he was doing around that time. And I mean, I think that he is, although I have qualms with some of his takes on aesthetics, I do think that he does have a point about how the modern world, because of of how absurd and grotesque it can be, that if you're going to make something beautiful out of it or create senses of beauty within it, then you have to incorporate that grotesqueness and sickness, as kind of core parts of what it is to be human, and especially what it is to be human in the modern day.
Yeah, we should also mention that Baudelaire was an important art critic. So he was writing some important art criticism of the salons of, I think it's the 1830s, 1840s, through to the 1860s, I think. And he was quite influential. He wrote The Painter of Modern Life, which was basically saying that we have to move on from the nymphs and the dryads and so forth. We have to paint modern life, which of course is kind of in conflict with his symbolism, which was kind of to get away from modern life. So he's got this twin approach that is both disdaining the modern and saying also, well, we have to turn away from the ancient in a way because it's no longer authentic. It's not telling us anything about our own lives. And he was quite friendly with Manet, and so of course you'd obviously think of Manet's Olympia. But actually, when Baudelaire wrote about the painter of the modern life, he was actually thinking of an artist called Forain, who was actually quite an insignificant, not particularly good painter of street scenes. So his artistic taste was not always ideal, but he had lots of very stimulating ideas, and certainly provoked a lot of artists to try and live up to the ideal of being a painter of modern life.
Interesting. Just going back to that thought of the kind of grotesque beauty. Like again, I don't know if grotesque is the right word, but there is again some interesting psychological studies about beauty where you need some slight things that are wrong with someone's face to be super beautiful. So again, something like symmetry scores very highly for beauty, but also having a little bit of asymmetry at the same time, or something a little bit different, enhances that beauty almost.
That's very true. I know certainly for models, for like photographic models, what they say is, and for sort of some fashion models, what they want is something that's a little bit exaggerated, a little bit vulgar, because that photographs very well. It's very distinct. Whereas someone who's actually just relatively pretty actually comes off as quite bland when they're photographs, even though if you met them in real life, you'd be stunned at how attractive they are.
I was just trying to bring up a picture of Lara Stone's teeth. just an example of that. Yeah, exactly.
And was it Kate Moss's? She's got like a gap in between her front teeth, Kate Moss. So yeah, and it's to have something distinctive or unusual that goes beyond the merely attractive, that goes into the realm of the strange or the distinctive.
I mean, obviously I'm not alone in this by a long way, but I mean, I've always found beauty marks and sort of facial freckles and that sort of thing very, very pretty on women, just because, again, it detracts from the doll-like symmetry that kind of is too uncanny to be beautiful, I think. Somebody just left a very good comment down in the chat where they said, the soul creeps through the cracks in the perfection, and I think that's what it is. It's it reassures you that you're looking at a human and not something that's mocking up as a human.
It's interesting that like trying to attain these platonic perfect forms of beauty versus reality and actuality as well, and that kind of play off. But I liked thinking about Baudelaire's almost paradoxical views. I think that's a good way of thinking about it.
One thing to note, because you mentioned about the grotesque and that sort of angling for some of the sort of beautiful sicknesses in life. I mean, he was a very prolific translator as well as Alexander pointed out, an art critic and a writer. And he translated, I think he was the first to translate Edgar Allan Poe's writings into French. This is while Poe was still around. And I may be wrong, but I don't think Poe is actually very famous around this time. It was not like this was some major American work of art he was translating. It was still a pretty underground thing. And he was kind of, I think, because of his attraction to that whole sort of, I think grotesque is certainly the right word, because of course in nowadays it has kind of its meaning is altered slightly to mean more straightforwardly disgusting, but of course back then it still had its original meaning of being kind of artistically disgusting, that leads you into a sense of kind of aesthetic beauty. I think that's how I describe it anyway. You think of the gargoyles on the churches and things. They are artistically ugly without being hard to look at, really. Or I suppose it depends on the gargoyle, but if you see what I mean, it's that sense of something sort of being a contradiction in terms of being beautiful yet sort of not. If you see what I mean?
Yeah. Well, although one thing I would say, I do wonder if there is maybe a little bit of truth in Yockey in the idea that this focus on we'll just use grotesque for sake of simplicity. Maybe this is the beginning of the slippery slope to where subjective beauty and anything can be beautiful, anyone can be beautiful. A morbidly obese woman is as beautiful as Venus herself.
But again, this is sort of Yockey's like for example, like what you just mentioned, say the like sort of there is a straightforward ugliness and there is a grotesqueness, and they are two very separate things. And I mean, I don't think it's fair to put the blame on people like Baudelaire. And I mean, of course, this idea that because he was trying to seek out the grotesque, he caused these things to happen. I mean, would the same argument apply to, I don't know, Hieronymus Bosch, and all the sort of grotesquerie and the sort of darkness and the sickness and the pain that came through in his artwork. I mean, if it were true that by doing that you caused a decline, then we would have to take it back a lot further, and the argument begins to fall apart, I think.
Yeah, interestingly, I personally feel like it's less the kind of focus on the grotesque beauty and more actually the jettison of subject as the bigger issue. Where again, if you see how the Impressionists and beyond approach the subject, like I said before, they don't really care about it. It's more about colours, design and composition, and I think that had a bigger negative effect than, because again, even though Baudelaire's beauty it has that kind of slight grotesque element, you still need beauty, if that makes sense. You still need that objective truth, and I think you're right that you can't lay the blame at his door.
I know, although just quickly on that, I mean, I would say that the trouble perhaps, I think this is also true for the visual arts, but I can only really speak for literature. That lack of subject that talented, sort of geniuses like Baudelaire could do, where they could take abstract concepts and build up emotion around them. What happened since then, throughout the last 100 years, is that you have all these sort of what I call university poets who do that, but rather than trying to strike you with emotions, they just talk about themselves. The only subject they're capable of writing about or painting about is themselves and their own rotten, vacuous, boring lives and souls. And that's where it starts to fall apart, because you can't do what Mallarmé did with the image of that swan in its kind of perfect whiteness with your own. With yourself, because that's it's self-obsessive and it's arrogant and it's not fun to read.
That's such a good point, as the poet as the obsession with the self.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether I should say this, anyway. I'll just say it anyway. But my wife tried to break through on the poetry scene in London for a long time, and basically never was successful over several years. And it was interesting seeing the kinds of people that would get through to the kind of final rounds or get voted through by the panels. And it was a very narcissistic affair, whether it was personal experiences or the kind of person you are. And describing that is what's in vogue right now. So
I'm not going to go on about this too long because it's off topic. But I mean, what you said there, I mean, what you've got at this point, practically, all this time on, is that narcissists and talentless people are choosing other narcissists and talentless people, and I say this as somebody that submits a lot of poetry to various places. Though luckily I've now got to the point where I know which places are still sane and which places are just utterly corrupted. And there's very few of them around, but they still are there. But in most places, what you get is people who, for whatever reason, have come to believe that what makes poetry alive is how much a person can complain in the poem and write about their own neuroses and problems that they have. And of course, it's the paradox is that, of course, all art and all poetry is someone writing about themselves in some way. Of course, like that's a basic fact. But it's this obsessive vacuous, because it's all very well and good to write about things if you have experience in certain interesting things and you have nuance and you have something to say. But if it's just you writing about writing badly about mundanity and just your own problems, then it's just awful. It's just bad poetry and it, at least a bad art, I would say. And of course, but you have people that were brought up to believe that that's what poetry is, and as I said, they've gone on to just run these institutions and run the competitions and the publishing aspects of it, and so that's all they want to pick. They read poetry that's written that's sort of that has a sort of talent to it, that's written about something impersonal or implies a sort of transcendence beyond your own sort of dull soul, and it confuses them and it sort of repulses them, or it sort of just bores them, because that's not what they're there for. They want to hear you complain about how oppressed you are. That's what it is.
Last thing I'll say on this, but there is an interesting irony where we've actually gotten beyond subjective standards of beauty and truth, where it doesn't anyone's truth is real, to actual definite objective truth. It's just truth based on the personal values of those people, so and again they're just looking for what they what they think is right, which is wrong. Anyway, let us move on. Alex, you've been patiently waiting for your.
No, I've been silently agreeing, but also patiently waiting.
Okay. Let us dive into your first artist. Please tell us more, a little bit about Arnold. Am I pronouncing this right? Böcklin?
Böcklin, yes, very good. Yeah, so Arnold Böcklin, Swiss symbolist. Just get up my cheat sheet. So Arnold Böcklin, born in 1827, died in 1901. Spent most of his life in Germany and then later in Italy. Lived in Florence for a long time. And so here we have like one of a typical symbolist painting here. So this is Death with Death, self-portrait with Death, the fiddle player. And there you are. You see, just like Hope we looked at last time, down to a single string on the lyre. Here we have a single string on the violin, and he's listening to the tune just before it snaps and he dies.
That's interesting, because again, just his facial expressions, it's not like he can't see the monster behind him. He can only just faintly hear it. So I think it's a really poignant and clever painting. And again, am I right in thinking that's like a cleared palette? So he's finished painting as well. There's kind of
I guess idea. Yeah. I mean, it looks as though he's almost done. Yes.
Yeah. Almost done with life. That's very, very spooky. I guess the symbology is quite quite apparent here, but like quite cleverly done at the same time. Shall I move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes. Okay. So this is a Battle of Centaurs. This is so he took some mythological subjects as starting points for work. I think this one's actually a particularly good one, because this is sort of interesting because it's both symbolist and it's rooted in traditional imagery, but it's also quite realistic. I think it's got some real grit to it, and it's got some dynamism as well, which I think a lot of symbolist pictures they romantic art has a lot of action and adventure and drama. Symbolist art can often be quite static. I like this one because this is actually more in the romantic tradition. It's got more energy and it's got a touch more realism. So it's more exciting.
Yeah, and of course, like centaurs are famous for being like one of the most savage creatures in the classical mythology, aren't they? So you can see, this guy literally picking up a rock to club someone else to death.
And you just imagine the effect of being hit over the head with a rock like that.
and they're known for their kind of brutal strength. Although interestingly, I don't think you ever see any kind of female depictions at all, do you? It's always men.
I'm sure they're probably. I'm sure if you go to Tumblr or Instagram, I'm sure there's some art there.
In the classical realm, I should say.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I thought you were talking about your anime, your favorite art, of course.
Panama. How do you rate these horses?
Well, I mean, I'm no technician when it comes to art, so I'm not going to venture any commentary on them. And of course, technically, I suppose they are not horses, but I mean, I've seen horses in moments of sort of peril and panic and contortion, and it does have that energy. This is basically, with the exception of them being half man, they are essentially horses fighting each other, and it's a very, very technically accurate from at least a lay point of view. It's a very technically accurate rendering of horses in chaos, I suppose.
I think they're also they're quite imbued. They're imbued with some sort of monumental energy and stature, because of course you can see them against these giant cumulus clouds, and you think about the sheer size of a horse. I mean, it's quite intimidating, and that I think this painting does capture that quite well.
Yeah, and they must be on some kind of mountaintop as well. They've got the kind of snow and the mountainous terrain, so they're kind of high up in the sky. This is almost like a battle to the death, and with the last man the last horseman standing.
The last centaur. The last centaur. Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Becoming the king of the tribe or something like that. No, I really like this. This is cool.
Okay, so we have another. I think this is just a generic painting of a maiden chained to a rock. So this is like, I think it's a standard thing that you get in something like Perseus and Andromeda. Mm-hmm. And this is something that's I think it's quite effective. So this is I think that he's about halfway between Rops and Puvis. So Puvis is quite sort of dry and chilly and cool and quite sort of relatively asexual, and then you had Rops, who we discussed in our first stream on Symbolism, which you can go back and see after this, which was like highly sexual, very erotic, and this is kind of like somewhere halfway in between. So it's got a degree of fidelity towards mythological subjects, but it's also got a touch more. It's got a touch more realism. It's got a touch more sensuality, and of course you've got the sensuality of all the water rushing over the rocks and so forth. So you've got sort of the idea of you've got sound and you've got feeling as well. So it's a little bit sort of sensory, a little bit tactile.
Yeah, I mean, you've got that kind of, you can see the kind of cloth just perilously protecting her modesty there, and that's the kind of eroticism of it. But again, the kind of the face, I would say, is not the most beautiful face, is it really? Again, maybe I'm seeing too much. I'm seeing faces in the rocks now as well. I wonder if that's intentional. But again, I like the kind of the ray of sun penetrating through him, just highlighting that kind of brass grate, which I think is such a lovely touch on the painting. And then the colours themselves are so evocative and beautiful. You can see here where the sea level rises to, so you know that she's going to be
that's right. Yeah.
Away. So again, there's that kind of subtle hint of what's going to happen. This is the last bit of the sun coming down. So again, I think very, very subtle, and but has a lot of additional meaning to it. No, that's nice as well.
So this is very famous painting. This is the Die Toteninsel, the Isle of the Dead. This was his most famous painting.
The Toten Incel.
Yes,
it sounds like the dead incel or something like that.
Yeah. Wow. Well, not quite, because he did have a wife and did have children, and this is actually the origin of the painting. That his one of his children, called Maria, died when she was a child, and she was buried near Florence, and this scene is thought to be based partially on the English cemetery in Florence. Though this is an invented scene, so obviously Florence is inland. It's not part of a lake or on the sea. But there are a couple of ideas about where Bauquelin might have come up with this idea, but I think it's been invented. And here you have the barge carrying the coffin draped with a garland, and the boatman is rowing the. Yes, that's right. Yeah, so the boatman is rowing the boat towards the Isle of the Dead, where the boatman and will inter the coffin, and then you have the widow dressed in white standing above it, and they're approaching this the steps into the graveyard. And this is his most famous painting. He did 5 versions of this, and it was reproduction prints of this image, which they're all basically the same. It's 5, so it's reproduction prints of these of this image that became incredibly famous. Max Klinger, the German symbolist, made a reproduction print of this. This became world famous. There are 5 versions. There was the Basel version. There's the Basel version, New York, Leipzig, Rotterdam, which was destroyed in the war. And this is the German version. This is the Berlin one. And very curiously, do you know who owned this painting?
The Berlin one.
Yeah.
The Kaiser.
No. One of his Panama.
Well, was it before or after the Kaiser?
It was after the Kaiser.
Was it a certain corpulent air Reichsmarshal?
It was no. Interestingly enough, it was a famous Austrian painter.
Oh, the Austrian painter himself.
The most famous Austrian painter. This actually belonged to him. This is his personal version.
That's so funny.
That he bought in. Well, Wikipedia says 1933. I've seen 1932. But it was bought by him for his own private collection. This was not for Linz. This was not for Berlin. This was his own private one, which became German state property after May 1945. So that's quite interesting that you would have had him looking at this painting and meditating upon, listening to Wagner and meditating upon the future of European civilization.
I don't know if it would be enough just on him for a whole stream. I suppose we probably have to include others as well, but it would be interesting to talk about the Austrian painter's personal art collection, and his kind of attachment to the arts. Although, I mean, most of it would probably be me calling Hitler a variety of sort of mocking slurs, but it would be interesting to see what his tastes were, and what kind of inspired him and obsessed him. And he obviously has the very famous association with Wagner and German Romanticism and that sort of thing. But it would be interesting to talk about for a few hours.
Panama's desperate to get my channel removed from YouTube by doing an entire Hitler art stream. Thank you.
It would be a difficult stream to sell, wouldn't it? The conversation would at least be interesting.
I think it's curious that the Hope, the G.F. Watts painting that you showed last time. That's actually a favorite painting of Obama. So we're
no.
indirectly doing the favourite paintings of famous world leaders.
You know, I often, perhaps this is a controversial thing to say. I don't know how this will affect the stream, but it's interesting to think that I'm now in a place where the name Obama stirs more hatred than the name Hitler. When I hear it, it's very interesting. A great deal more hatred.
That is the spiciest take of the week, right there.
I think it's fair to say that you've already exhausted your hatred for one of them already, but the other one is still rising in your level of hatred.
Well, I mean, to be honest, with Hitler, it's more sort of this. I find what he did in a very dark way ridiculous or amusing in a sense. I just find the whole concept of Hitlerism ridiculous, whereas Obama I just think is. I'm not going to get into it now. This is not on topic at all. I apologize.
Yeah. So to get us out of that, I'll say if anyone's curious and they want and they're interested, I wrote a very, very short story about the Isle of the Dead, about this painting, which you can find and you can buy in a little book called On Art, not On Art 2, but On Art, which you can find on Amazon, or also you can patronize Ragged Lion Press. They have books, they have copies to sell, so you can support a small press by buying copies there.
I mean, that's
not why I included it, but
that's some grade A shilling right there.
Thank you very much
from Alex. Just the smoothness of that segue, literally. Exactly. This is why you're the prime AA, because AA would not be able to.
It means so much to me.
Just going back to the painting a second. What I love about it again is again just the connection to nature here. You've got the kind of the sky, the water, and the trees make up over 50% of the painting, and again, the rocks. So it's all around naturalism. The ideas of this kind of the mechanical machine manufactured man has been dispelled, and we're kind of left with these prehistoric Neolithic tombs carved into the very walls themselves. Even the boat has got this guy hand boating in to death. You've also got this idea of sanctuary as well, where again you've got these tempestuous clouds, although the kind of water around them has reached this kind of glassy level. We know that there's storms coming and pain ahead, but you can see this is like a big U shape. The kind of strong, tall rocks are going to be sanctuary from that. So again, really interesting, touching ideas about grief and meaning beyond it. So I've really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and also the cypress is a common symbol in. It's a common tree that you find in cemeteries. It's an evergreen, so it's related to the idea of eternity and afterlife. So the cypress, so that's one of the connections of the cypress.
And just again, I'm sorry if this was mentioned and I missed it, but just from a kind of from where I'm sitting, the most fascinating thing about this is that, of course, you got this sense of it being an island, but also just the way that the perspective is built up. So it appears to like it's that sort of optical trick of it being this tiny little bit of rock in the middle of a lake, but it also goes on forever within itself. The trees don't end, or there's no. It's not clear how deep this goes, And I think, as you pointed out, it's that harking of eternity and almost sort of like an abyss. There is no end to this. It just goes on despite appearing finite.
The entrance to the underworld.
Yes.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I hope we'll have to see if it's as pretty as this when we get there one day.
And it's it's been a favourite subject. So it's inspired an artist called Glenn Brown. Now this version is based on the I think this is based on the New York version. So this is Glenn Brown is a British artist who was born in the 1950s, I think. No, 1960s. I think it's 1966. And he was an artist who studied at Goldsmiths, which was my old college. And this is a painting of his called Zombies of the Stratosphere, painted in 1999, and it is on shaped steel. So this is steel over an MDF panel. So basically, it's been cut exactly around the image. So you know how in the other painting you had this sort of the island floating in this sort of glassy sea, and then you had the clouds behind, and it's sort of it exists as a block floating in space. Here we have literally the motif floating as a block against a white wall. So this is a shaped picture hanging against a white background.
Did he paint it, or is this literally just a print of?
No, he painted it. He's a really interesting artist. So he's one of the few artists working today whose work I think is going to last. So that's Glenn Brown. If you just go to glennbrown.co.uk, you'll see all sorts of wild and weird things. But he's an absolutely consummate painter. He does some amazing things. Maybe we'll talk about him on another stream, but I thought this was interesting because this is just one of the artworks that's been inspired by Buklin's Isle of the Dead. Also, Rachmaninoff's did a symphonic poem, which you can also find on YouTube. It's just a 20-minute orchestral piece.
Yeah, no, I think the paintwork's excellent, and I like the concept as well. Although I have to say that I do prefer the colours of the original. I think just when Panama said that the attempt, like going into that depth, that I hadn't thought about that, and I really like. I think that's slightly missing from this one, but still very interesting. And I will also check out Glenn Brown. Okay, Alex, do you want to talk about your next person?
Do you want to remind me who it is? Oh, Spiliart, yes. So yeah, we rearranged the order of the art. Sorry. So this is Leon Spiliart, another one of my favorite Belgian painters, picking up the Belgians as usual. He was let me get up his stats here. Yeah. So he was born in 1881. He died in 1946. He was principally based in Ostend. So he lived on the coast, on the Belgian coast, Flanders coast. And this is a portrait of him done in yes, and this is done in November 1908. You may remember having seen this if you've been in London about a year and a half ago, or no, about a year ago. It's quite melancholy, but the last exhibition I saw before everything closed down was an exhibition of Leon Spiliart at the Royal Academy in London. And so this is him. He used to suffer from insomnia, and he would paint through the night. So this is one of his paintings done in the family's greenhouse or their conservatory, I think. So with this sort of giant windows and mirrors and stuff, and of course quite dramatic lighting, accentuating his skull-like visage, and full of foreboding and melancholy and so forth. And I think it's a very effective painting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Leon paints a lot of self-portraits, doesn't he? Like I've seen over like 4 or 5 at least. So he's obviously interested with the self and depictions of that. But just you mentioning that skull, the kind of skull-like face, you can see that he's just highlighted. He's gone beyond what you would do for a normal highlight here. So you can see how his entire kind of eye socket is fully sunk down. Normally you put a bit of highlighting on, at the top across here, or maybe more of the cheek into there. But that's almost like a skull. If you look at a skull, the full cavity across there with no fleshy tissue. So again, it's a real subtle way of getting that skull. And again, if you see the patterning across here, if you look at a skull bone, it's got the same. I'm sure there's a medical term for it, but the kind of cheek bone looks exactly like this. So he's kind of like he's highlighting the face like you would do a skull as opposed to a normal face, if that makes sense, and that's what gives it its macabre qualities.
And he's relatively young at this stage, so obviously he's kind of playing this up. This was done in 1908. He was born in 1881, so he's still relatively young. So he's 27 or something. So he's playing it up, obviously. A little bit emo.
You mentioned, I mean, he suffered insomnia, and there's the whole connection with the kind of dreamscape with this painting. I think, I mean, the entire room he's in appears to be a sort of liminal space. You know, it's between being really existent and being a dream. Essentially, that's the sense I get. This kind of strangely darkly lit, abandoned sort of cafe, or wherever he's supposed to be. You know.
Yeah, I think obviously it's sort of spatially, it's quite ambiguous. There's lots of different facets and reflections and so forth. So he's playing up on this, and this is obviously this was painted after his parents had gone to bed, and he was just left alone in the house in the dark.
Yeah, and just going on this kind of idea of limbo, so again, the kind of after dark, you know, he's awake, he is in you know, an actual limbo in his life, you know, imagine being the only one awake when everyone's sleeping. That's a kind of limbo. But then with his colors, he's also kind of brought us into there. So everything is on this like super low chroma, like you've got the occasional pop of, a little bit of blue here, a little cheeky bit of really, you know, pale
very,
green.
Very pale green on the table, and there's sort of the brown of the wood. But basically it's grisaille, isn't it? It's black and white.
And again, so that's why it's almost like some kind of black and white dream you're in. You've got the kind of a few little symbolist touches on there. I think again the knife on the counter in front of you. Is he contemplating something?
And the calendar. Yeah, obviously.
Is it a 3 or a 5?
I think that's a. Where is it? That's a 3. Yes, this was painted on the 3rd of November, 1908, and this is one of his typical thing was to do. It was sort of black crayon and ink wash. So this is done on paper, and he just used a little bit of color to highlight certain areas. Yeah,
and again, it's an interesting thing about the inks because again, it gives everything a bit of a liquid quality to it. So again, it's kind of like are you seeing reality or are you seeing beyond reality at the same time? So very cool. Next one.
Okay, so this is the colonnade. This is another feature of Ostend. So if you ever go to Ostend, you'll go along the beach and you'll see this sort of neoclassical 19th century building, which is used for, it has different things in it. I think there's a cafe there and there's a little display space there. I was part of a small exhibition which took place in this colonnade, and I went along to see it, which was pretty cool. So that was a group exhibition. It was a number of, I think it was about 8 or 10 British artists, and I was one of them. And so you could walk along this sort of colonnade. So on the left, you've got the sea. The sea was a constant subject for Spiliart because, of course, he could play with reflections. He could play with sort of watery highlights. Again, almost always at night. And you find that his best work is quite early, it's quite simple, it's relatively muted in colour, and it's based around Ostend and motifs of the sea and the street and the promenade and so forth. Later on, he did other work which is much less successful. So, I mean, he's an artist who's good when he's young, and then he kind of loses his mojo. So, but this is one of his better pictures from early on.
Yeah, it's interesting you kind of point around the sea versus land, because again, he's turned the land into this black abyss-like pathway, and actually the sea itself has a little bit more kind of solid nature, being like depicted as pure white. But did you don a top hat when you were down the colonnade? And is there a picture of you with your hand out?
No, actually, I was there. I was there in the summer, and actually was wearing shorts, and I got sunburned. But so not like this at all.
Yeah, the figure itself's quite mysterious, though. Again, maybe he's waving to the light. Again, there's this idea of eternity and limbo. Maybe he's just waving to hoping that someone would notice him. You know,
the night walker is a common subject for sort of symbolist art and for like late 19th century art as well. You know, the idea of the flaneur, the street walker who walks just sort of observing things in a detached way. So it's another way of sort of saying, you know, like someone who's sort of an observer but is not involved. But of course, I mean, that's like a sort of a particularly literary conceit, I think, isn't it, Panama?
Yes, I think so, primarily.
I've put in one of his later works here, which is the Bathers. I don't know if you can see that, Alex.
Yes. So this is one of the later works. He did lots of works using very strong patterns. So this is one of the more effective later ones where you've got the reflections, the ripple reflections. He produced a number of prints and so forth. Amazingly, he did these in very bright colours, and of course they look terrible, but you know, quite psychedelic. But he was obviously quite interested in sort of sinuous outlines, and this is something that you can see reflected in Art Nouveau. So Art Nouveau was an art form which was sort of rose in the sort of 1890s, and of course very much related to the sinuous arabesque. Something that Poe actually wrote about was the arabesque, the exotic curve, the expressive curve. And this is something that you can see here. So you've got the bathers who are dissolving into these sort of sinuous, serpentine, shadowy reflections and the curling ripples of the water.
It's interesting you mentioned about the 70s-ness of it, because again, that's now you say it, I can really see it. I think there's a really interesting cultural anthropology thing around how the 70s drew so much from kind of Art Nouveau and this kind of period for their own symbology. And again, the kind of people dissolving away. This is very trippy. I think what we're missing here for the 70s in this is the absolutely horrific, lurid chemical colors, basically.
Oh, he did some in those colors. So yeah, you can go and find them. They're on the internet. Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's right. So in the 1970s, you have like a revival of. Well, in the 1960s, you have a revival of Aubrey Beardsley. In 1970s, you have a revival of Klimt and Art Nouveau and the Mucha posters of women smoking and sort of So in the 1960s and 70s, there's a big return to the sort of fin de siècle idea of decadence and ornamentation and pattern. I think it was sort of as a reaction to the 1950s streamlined modernism.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I almost see it as like a case study of why, why I wouldn't necessarily describe myself as a traditionalist when it comes to art. In the fact that we need to bring back, or like a pure that we need to bring back certain forms of art, because the 70s already tried that and ultimately failed. You know, that they were very, like I said, it was a reaction against the 60s and the 50s, and they were unsuccessful about bringing older forms of art back into the future. I think you can certainly draw from tradition, but you need to create something new at the same time to have success. So anyway, some interesting stuff inside there. Okay, shall we, Panama, do you have any more poetry or quotes for us?
Well, I do have some things I could read, but I mean, without wanting to be anticlimactic, I mean, I've kind of summed up the literary aspect here. I've made the real kind of core points of it. But I think perhaps one thing we should mention, if we're going to talk about the Symbolists, and particularly this era of Symbolists, before perhaps we move on to how it sort of went away as a literary and artistic movement, would be perhaps just briefly the personalities of the Symbolists themselves. I don't really feel we should talk about this without discussing that just a bit. You know, obviously in the literary world, Baudelaire is the kind of archetypical sort of, like the progenitor of the kind of tortured dandy,
Look at this image across it. This is ridiculous. I had to double check that to see if this was Baudelaire, but apparently this is like an early portrait.
Yes. He was sort of, peak, I don't even know what to call it really. I mean, just you know exactly what I mean, don't you? This kind of thing. I mean, long before he ever printed a word of poetry or prose, he was basically known around the artistic world as this young dandy who kept inheriting various things from members of his family who died, and he would just go and spend all of it immediately. He would inherit, thousands and thousands of francs, and then he would just spend a couple of years partying around Paris, with this money, free spending on anybody that came up to him, any sort of half-known acquaintance who he saw in a cafe, he would just buy lunch for, this sort of thing, and party around. So yes, it's kind of I don't want to go and say, well, this is obviously just him trying to be a particular sort of artistic type. But I mean, if you weigh it up against his later poetry, I suppose it's that kind of proto decadence that he later came to have quite a few issues with, and that realization that excess and kind of rush is not what makes you feel more human in the world around you. It's a kind of false assumption that unfortunately later artistic movements did not heed, or they didn't realize was false. Hence, you get kind of drug-addled hippies who want nothing but pleasure out of life. As they try and compose various works of art or poetry or books, which that's. And what I particularly like about this picture of him is that he kind of is in that moment of realization. I think that misery that comes with free spending and carelessness. The kind of in fact, you could probably compare it to that picture of the prodigal son among the pigs. In terms of the similar sort of thing has happened there.
There's interesting. He kind of looks like one of Poe's anti-heroes or something like that, quote unquote heroes. Tortured.
And interestingly, this all ties into what we were talking about last week, because we talked about ROPS, and you remember one of the subjects of ROPS was the idea of the dangerous woman, the dangerous harlot, because of course there was this danger of there was a linkage between beauty and death, because of course venereal disease, especially syphilis, was obviously something that fused the idea of Thanatos and Eros. And of course, Baudelaire famously met his end through syphilis.
Did he? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get the most syphilitic picture. It looks pretty healthy. I mean, that's definitely.
Yeah. He died in 1867. So. I'm not sure. I'm just looking at his Wikipedia page for images. It doesn't appear that he had many pictures taken of him in his later years.
Because he would have probably been disfigured. Well, actually, the disfigurement. Yeah, the disfigurement. Comes in different stages, because I think there's 3 stages of syphilis.
I mean, somebody in the advanced stages of syphilis is genuinely quite a horrific thing. It probably would not be. I would not call him vain for not wanting to be photographed at that stage of his life. But yes, I was going to bring something up then. I can't remember what it was. Yes, he was. Again, this is slightly off topic because Courbet is sort of. I know he's in the periphery of this, but he's not a. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he's a realist, isn't he? Not
he's a realist. Classed as a realist.
But in the period, I believe, the period in which the two of them, him and Courbet, were trying to sort of vie for some artistic success, before they kind of had their breaks in their careers, were quite close friends. And I sent Ferro a portrait of a young.
The famous one. The famous one of Courbet, yeah.
Which is particularly nice. just I don't know. It's I've got a print of this painting, and yeah, I don't know. It's just I'm a big sucker for any paintings that show artists and writers at work, and I particularly like it's just the sort of studiousness, the casualness of the clothes he's wearing, the sort of the table piled up with gnarled books and paper and felt. It's like, as somebody who spends a lot of time writing, I appreciate the minimalism of it, the kind of messy minimalism that is a lot less romantic than the studio of the artist, with all the sort of millions of things that you need in order to create visual art versus the literary arts. It's just got the ink and the quill and the sort of notebook, and that's it. That's the sort of, that's all it is.
It's quite austere. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I like the dressing gown look. He's got the cravat. It's cozy, but it's also functional.
It's very cozy.
All he needs is a cup of Nescafe.
Yes, a lovely Nescafe.
Nescafe
Or
goals.
absinthe.
As if Charles Baudelaire would have drunk Nescafe.
Oh dear. Okay, so if you don't mind, I'd like to go on to my last person, if that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a chap called John Duncan. Now, John is someone I think is one of those underrated artists again, and actually possibly one of Scotland's, I'm going to say it's one of Scotland's finest artists. Now, I've got to say that he has been kind of picked up a little bit more, and I was annoyed and gutted to see that literally there was a Guardian article writing about him but 6 months ago, which again, he was always my like little secret that I had, my little gem, but it's been plundered. But I thought I'd kind of highlight him to everyone, but because he very much sits in the kind of post Puvis and Moreau genre, and again, he's one of those kind of interesting British symbolists that sort of sits outside of the mainstream. Now, very much unlike Moreau and Puvis, he had no money whatsoever. His father was a grocer, and his mother, was like a lower middle class worker in Dundee, is where he's from. But he sort of carved out a career by doing illustrations for magazines, and apparently he stopped doing it because he describes it as hack work. So I think he just got tired of it. Went trained in Antwerp, and then interestingly had a trip to Italy where he was inspired, and it kind of things came to place again. I think there's some real interesting ideas about the Grand Tour and the trip to Italy as being the kind of catalyst for so many artists. I guess it's kind of like the pre-internet world, isn't it? Where you're kind of seeing amazing things for the first time. But basically, he starts off by doing some work with like the Dundee School of Arts, which collapses because surprisingly no one wants art in Dundee. Ends up spending some time in Chicago, but basically dies virtually penniless and an alcoholic in Edinburgh. So he has a very sad life, but he brings in a kind of a unique kind of post Art Nouveau and symbolism into his works, and this is one of his earlier pieces, and it's an Orpheus cycle. So again, I mentioned last stream that Orpheus is a common theme in symbolist works. You can see Orpheus across here. He's famous for being able to tame animals with his skill on the lyre. I mean, actually, Panama. You're I guess you're a bit of an Orphean figure with your poetry, but hopefully.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I've tamed any animals with it. But
I hope you wear more clothes when you recite your poetry.
I'm very, very buttoned up. I'm certainly not going around like that. If I had anything like that figure,
Yeah. But yeah, you can see him. He's soothing the hounds of hell. So again, the story of Orpheus and Euripides is Euripides dies, and he goes to hell to try and claim her back. And he literally plays to Hades and Persephone across here, and he plays a song that's so beautiful that Hades lets her take it back. However, there's a condition that if he turns back, Hades gets to pull her back to the underworld. So you can see him coming through the underworld. I think this is kind of Hades' domain. But Persephone with a kind of flower, because remember she's around only a couple of is it like spring and summer, and then she's down in December and
yes, just to return to the underworld. Yeah,
exactly. And that's him grabbing her, but then he looks behind him, and then she gets taken back, and he basically ends up. I can't remember. He either kills himself, or I think the animals eat him.
Yeah, I think he's ripped to death. I think, isn't he?
Yes.
It's always been one of my absolute favorite myths, just because, like, I remember reading it as a very sort of young teen, and like I know people say, so, it's a bit of a cliche to say, oh, it sort of changed my life, but I would say this and Crime and Punishment probably were the major sort of, I don't know, artistic, philosophical catalyst in my life so far, for probably where I am today, just because my personal opinion has always been that Orpheus was doomed to fail from the start, that he was never capable of not turning around to look back, because that's just how people are. He was never capable of rescuing her from the underworld. That's the sense I've always got from it.
Well, there's the thing where it's kind of like, if you love someone enough to literally go to hell and bring them back, you're surely going to look back on them. You know what I'm saying? It's a really clever punishment that Hades put in place. It's catch-22. If you wouldn't be here if you don't do that. So it's kind of like you said,
it's that pure. It's almost like sort of a charge against humanity, isn't it? It's like if you love somebody, as you said, if you love somebody to that extent, you will try and look back.
Yeah.
It's like a psychological profile, because it's the same with Narcissus and so forth, isn't it? It's like a psychological profile.
But this is kind of his early work. You can see it's very, very Art Nouveau, but he basically then ends up taking quite a symbolist turn, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. I won't dwell on this one too much, but this is called Hep2 bidding farewell to the city of Ob. Now, what's interesting is that he picks up on a bit of what's known as like a Celtic or Norse revival. So in the kind of late 19th century, people are really interested in Celtic tales again, or and kind of like Irish stories and all that kind of stuff. And so this is a princess saying farewell to the kind of castle and the people behind. But again, the kind of the symbol of the fantastical animal and then the beautiful woman again is very, very, very Moreau at the same time. But both the last work was in watercolor. This is in oils. But where his best work is in, he basically then goes to Italy for a second time, and kind of gets inspired to do these kind of really interesting tempera paintings, where he again tries to get the kind of Puvis look a little bit, and you can tell that from again the kind of the land and the sea. This one is called okay, I haven't got the name for it. It's kind of like the ride of the She, which is the fairy folk. So basically, every single year on the eve of St. John's Day, the She ride forth from their dwellings to the sacred circle to initiate mortals into the mystery of their faith. And we can see here the four kind of fairy princes and queens taking along, pointing towards a mortal. And then each one of these Celtic fairy riders is holding a specific object of power. So the first one has got the tree of life, which represents wisdom. You've got the kind of holy grail, which represents love. You've got the sword, which is will in action, the sword of power, and then you've got the crystal. Can you see the crystal ball here, which represents will in passive? But I think it's a really interesting composition. There's loads of stuff going on symbolically. So again, obviously those individual items. You can see the kind of Celtic imagery. Certain fans of whatever the Hyborian theory may get excited about certain symbology in there as well. But again, they're kind of fully decked out like Celts. You've got a cockatrice down here, a creature known for turning humans into stone with a single gaze. You've got a wide variety of birds as part of the procession. But the picture really doesn't do it justice. It's a really beautiful painting, but it's got that kind of flatness that we talked about beforehand, while still pulling in some of those Puvis elements as well.
Yeah,
so
and it's got a touch of the pre-Raphaelites about it, hasn't it?
Yeah, like I think that's again, being in Britain, they've definitely got that the PRB and kind of medievalist school as well as because he trained in Antwerp, he's still got that kind of continental symbolism. So he was born in 1866, and this is 1910. So again, kind of interesting. Lots of. I mean, it's sort of no surprise he ended up penniless because everyone's interested in modernist works by this point, and he's still kind of churning out these symbolic works.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you compare it to the Cubists who started in sort of 1907. Obviously, this is, and the Expressionists who started around sort of 1908, 1909. So obviously, this looks a little anachronistic related to that. But if you think about, there's an interesting artist and poet called David Jones, who wrote a great poem called In Parenthesis, which is about comparisons between the trench warfare of the First World War and the warriors of Shakespearean drama and also of Celtic mythology, specifically Welsh mythology. And he was drawing these all together, and you see this kind of medievalism sort of bound into the story of the English Tommy, or actually the Welsh, because this was a Welsh regiment that he served in, even though he's born in England. So yeah, look up David Jones, because that's kind of an interesting parallel to something like this that was written during the First World War.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Panama, I had to ask about the horseshoes. Are these not the most pimped out horseshoes you've ever seen?
I mean, it's honestly a shame to think that you would pimp out your horse with shoes like that, knowing how quickly horseshoes wear out. With particularly horses like these that are being used all the time. So yeah, it's a lovely artistic touch, but on a practical level, it does make one wince rather.
You're ruining the magic there, Panama. Thank you. The next painting is St. Bride. So again, this is known as his kind of like masterwork. And it tells a tale of St. Bride, who apparently was the daughter of a druid from Iona, who was whisked away from Iona all the way to Bethlehem to be a nurse to Jesus, and then she brought Christianity back to the Celtic Christians, basically. So there's this idea of transportation from paganism to Christianity. So you can see kind of like the kind of pagan city across here, and then the kind of the dawning horizon of Christianity. These kind of angels pop out. You can see the kind of you see it often used quite a lot today, but the use of a border and then painting over it to give it that kind of 3D effect.
So is this because this looks like a design for a tapestry, really, doesn't it? But that's just a painted border, you say? Yeah.
That's just a painted border. Yeah.
And then they do this thing in 3D cinema, don't they? Where they have like the false edge, and then of course they get the most dramatic images to pop out, to go outside of the into the margin. Yeah,
exactly, like an optical illusion. But it's interesting you mentioned around tapestry, because again it does have that kind of textile feel, and then you've got the kind of meta narratives going on the bodies of the angels. So you've got on the left hand side the birth stories of Jesus. You can see the three wise men, the Annunciation to the shepherds across here, and then the kings arriving to see baby Jesus, and then the cattle shed. And then on the right hand side we've got the life of Jesus as well. So it's kind of like beginning and end, beginning in paganism, ending in Christianity. So again, the kind of reflections on the past and the future. But again, I think maybe people like compared to the kind of edgy grotesqueness, there is a kind of serene beauty to this that I think is quite lovely, and also quite interestingly original as well, because I mean he's obviously kind of relying on these kind of Celtic ideas and certainly Celtic Christianity, but again depictions of the angels like this are totally original. So again he is, because there's not much details from that time period, he's having to flesh it out with lots of his own imagination. So he's ending up creating something quite unique and original, even though it's meant to be traditional still, if that makes sense. So just the last two quickly. This one is his take on Oedipus and the Sphinx that we mentioned again last time that Moreau did. And interestingly, the Sphinx in this case has been turned into this kind of, it's hard to see in this version, but a blonde-haired man. I mean, the head sort of reminds me of some kind of Babylonian creature. If you see any of their kind of works, they often
sort of Assyrian winged bull. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. And I have a quote from the guy who owned this, and he considered it to be man versus Superman, the blonde beast. Humanity confronting the huge overarmed powers, and you're saying, to quote the words of Macbeth, "I do all that I may to become a man. Who dares do more is none." So this idea of humanity versus the blonde-haired Superman being this kind of horrific creature. This was done in 1934, so I wonder if it had any kind of other analogies, but again, some interesting symbolist language in the kind of. I love this little skull peeking out across here. the snake. I think he's meant to be standing on a snake as well, and again, there's a kind of a Christian allusion to that. So again, the kind of prophecy to Eve that her heel will crush the snake, which is kind of reference to Jesus there. So I wonder if there's a bit of that Christianity being pulled into it, and you can see this. Relatively, Oedipus here has been stripped from all of his symbols showing it's him, and it's just these two meeting of people, locked eyes, standing off against each other. So again, I think a very interesting piece with a few interesting elements.
Everything is rock. The motif is just rock and mountain. It's just everything's rock solid, and this is sort of like, without wanting to be flippant, it's sort of like chattery. The painting, it's like everything just so sort of solid and masculine. It's one of the only pieces of art I've seen, I think, where there's just absolutely no hint of femininity just anywhere. It's everything is masculine.
Yeah, that's interesting, and again, the sublimity, the idea of the sublime in the Burkean sense for of the mountain, or the cumulonimbus, again, these kind of the powerful clouds. Sublimity has always been tied to ideas of power as well. So again, it's natural power, it's physical power as well, but with the hint of death at the end. And then I've done a rather soppy. We're going to end on a really soppy painting, actually, because of time, unfortunately. But I thought I'd put this in here because I thought it was an interesting. This is actually obviously a historical narrative painting that he kind of finished with. This is one of his last ones, and this is, of course, Mary being held in the castle, and basically the scene is. I don't know if you can see that you have her two handmaidens who are both her kind of friends, her attendants, but also ultimately her jailers. And the executioner has come to take Mary away for her execution. But what I thought was interesting about this is this is a historical narrative painting as seen through the eyes of a symbolist. So, for example, you've got her outfit, which is black, symbolizing mourning. You can see across here the tapestry that's being held back. sort of symbolizes the situation that she's in. So you've kind of got this defeated warrior. He's been knocked off his horse. Can you see how his sword is underneath the horse itself? So he's totally defenseless. You know, he's already been unmanned, but he is now being killed on top of that. You know, again, normally you would capture people as for their bounties and whatever their, what's it called, ransoms. And even though, you know, he's defying chivalry to execute him, to execute a totally helpless person, you've got kind of this interesting French writing at the top, which is that, you know, in my end, in the end is the beginning, basically. So again, this idea is of beginning and end. Obviously, the end of Mary is her life in heaven as she sees it. She's holding onto the Bible and you know, quite a chunky rosary by the looks of it, I think. And yeah, no, I just think it's a very interesting take on a you know, a symbolic take on the history narrative, which we haven't really seen. But that is basically the end of John Duncan. Check out the rest of his works. He's got even more stuff than this. Like I said, criminally unappreciated until that Guardian article came along. So who knows?
Maybe ruined it all.
Well, I'm hoping that I'm pretty sure he's not really the taste of the typical Guardianista, so I think he's safe for now. But
find typical Guardianista has any taste at all, there, Ferro.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that brings us to a round end tonight. I'm hoping to do one more Symbolist stream, looking at some Slavs, and Alex has got some last painters in there as well. And Panama, I guess you can talk about Pound in that one, if that's okay.
I think what I'll do is I don't know how this would apply to the artistic world, but I will chart the kind of literary death of symbolism, which is actually quite tragic. But I won't say too much on that now.
Okay, wonderful. But Alex, do you have any kind of parting words for everyone about the work?
Yeah, well, just sort of thanks for tuning in. Remember to like and subscribe to Ferro's channel. Hit the subscribe bell, the notification bell. Sorry. Yeah, it's always fun. It's great to get some interaction on the chat as well. And so thanks for tuning in, and I think we'll have fun in the final part.
Yeah, definitely. And also, chat, if you do have questions, do try and pop them in there and we'll try and read them out as we go. I should have said that at the beginning, but you have to tune in next time to ask your questions. But Alex, Panama, have you got anything to plug or talk about stuff that's going on?
As I mentioned before, some point in the next, it could be like 3 weeks from now, or it could be like 2 months for all I know. But I'm gonna, as I've talked about before on your streams, publish some books under a pseudonym on Kindle for this community, specifically just dealing with certain things around life in the modern world as we see it. Because of course we have this issue now that the kind of contemporary political arena has kind of finally dropped away, the kind of placards and the scenery has fallen in at last after years of people being convinced that they still had some sort of faith in this community. I mean, specifically, then now people are starting to really think about these questions. Well, what the hell do we do? Like we can't just sit on the internet and obsess over political minutiae anymore. So now how do we actually go about living lives? So it's again, obviously I'm still a very young man, so I have no right telling people how to live. So it's basically just a small pamphlet sort of book detailing what aspects are important to bring up in life. It's not like a sort of page by page guide on how to live. It's just sort of what things to cherish and sort of prize as people go forward from now on. Sounds
very good. Sounds very positive. I mean, I think that whatever age you are, I think it's certainly well worth putting forward your ideas, and I think you'll get a good reception, because I think that you're quite in tune with with our viewers and with a lot of the other people that we talk to in our group. So yeah. And as for myself, nothing new at the moment. You can find my books on Amazon, or also particularly go to Ragged Lion Press. They've got a few of my books for sale there, so you can support a small press if you buy something from them.
Well, I was going to ask. So obviously, Iconoclasm was the last book, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Have you got anything in the pipeline? Are you working on it?
I do have something in the pipeline for April, but I think maybe we'll mention it in April rather than sort of bigging it up too early. But there is something coming out in April.
Now. The hype train begins now. Get on while you can do. Pre-order the mystery book.
Right. Well, okay. I'll make the announcement. Yeah, there's going to be a book published on the 8th of April called Degas. It's obviously about Edgar Degas, the famous or Degas. So it's a book about the artist. It's published by Prestel. You can pre-order it now, and I hope that maybe we'll be discussing it on this stream. We'll be looking at Degas' art and talking about the man and his work.
Sorry, I cut out there. Apologies, my Wi-Fi went for the end.
I thought you were just too stunned to reply.
just leaving us with a couple of moments of silence before we.
I was so excited about that. I literally just fell off my seat.
And, thanks everyone for joining us, and we've really enjoyed the chat. So leave a comment, and we'll try and get back to you if we feel that we can answer it.
Subscribe to Pharaoh, like his videos.
Right. Thank you very much. Good night.